Ready to go? Thank you. No problem at all. I think we should probably start because it is just gone 10 o'clock. That's okay. Welcome to this meeting of the Combined Authorities Audit Risk and Assurance Committee. Important meeting today. Major item of consideration is the report from Grant Thornton, our external auditors, on their audit of the accounts for the year ended March 23. So that's the largest item on the agenda, but we obviously have a number of other areas to consider during the course of the meeting. First of all, apologies. Apologies for attendance.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've received 5 apologies. Actually, so it's Councillor Ashley, Councillor Barsley, Councillor Baxter-Payne, Councillor Jaspal, and Councillor Kay. And those 5 apologies, of course, do mean that the meeting is technically quorate. And so the practice will be for this committee to consider the reports, but rather than having authority to approve them, that they will be recommendations that will then go in the minutes of this committee that go on to the WMCA board at the beginning of January.
Okay. Obviously frustrating, particularly given the subject matter. And given that the previous 2 meetings we were quorate, it is frustrating. I understand that in 4 of the cases it's down to illness and these things happen this time of year, but in those circumstances we haven't even managed to get substitutes to attend. So frustrating, but we are where we are. Thank you to those who have been able to attend the meeting, and we will proceed as set out. So can I just ask the usual question, do we have any indication of a representative from Staffordshire as of yet?
We don't, Chair, so no name to report, but we continue to chase the authority to make an appointment.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll continue to do so, hopefully by the next meeting.
Thank you. Okay, right, moving on to item 2 of the agenda, declarations of interest. Any declarations to be declared? Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I'm in a slightly unusual position, being directly affected by one of the audit recommendations. So it's just seeking some clarification on whether or not I'm allowed to take part in the vote on that.
So the question I ask is that a personal interest or arising from your membership of Birmingham City Council?
Rising from my membership of Birmingham City Council.
Okay, so if you declare when we get to that item, we record it in the minutes, but you can participate. If that the measure would be whether the interest arises as a result of you being a member of Birmingham City Council, or whether it arises as you as a personal individual.
So let me be specific. Would it help I be specific? So there is an auditor's recommendation that members who were part of the executive of the CA then no longer sit on the ACT committee for a period of 2 years, and I can into that.
Right. So let's err on the side of caution. Declare the interest, given that these will be recommendations to the CA board. I think it would be to avoid.
I don't think it's a matter of sort of concern at this stage until recommendation is accepted.
Yeah. But if we'll note it in the minutes, and then these minutes will go to the CA board for approval anyway. So
okay,
don't participate would be my advice.
In the vote or the whole discussion?
So in the vote.
That's fine. Thank you.
Any other declarations of interest to be noted? Very good. Chair's remarks, very quickly, just to capture a few comments here. I and 1 or 2 other members of this committee attended another more recent meeting of the West Midlands Audit Committee Chairs Forum on the 22nd of November. It was a good session. Actually, we had a lengthy discussion around procurement, which somewhat timely, given one of the other recommendations coming out from Grant Thornton. So that was a good session. Again, the topic of external auditor has obviously arose, but also the issue of independent members of audit committees as well. So quite timely, I think. I continue to engage with the chairs of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the Transport Overview and Scrutiny. And we've also had recently a question and answer session with the Mayor, which was useful. And we're in the middle of the process leading up to the question and answer session with the Mayor on the budget. And there was a good session last week in preparation for that session, where I do think there's a presentation there that was used, which again, I would welcome being brought to this committee in due course around the budget, because I think it's very important that members of our Act have an understanding of the financial framework in which the authority is acting. So a couple of other things, PSA updates have come out since our last meeting, one about the status of audits, and a second update on proposed fees for 23-24, and also lead audit appointments. So I think that's probably something which is worth noting at our January meeting. And then the final thing was a very useful note that Dan issued just after the autumn statement around scrutiny protocols as part of the audit and autumn statement, noting that it was non-statutory, an indicator of best practice, but it referenced matters such as multi-year appointments, relationships between scrutiny committees and audit committees, and a recommendation around audit committees producing an annual report to set out the nature of its work. And I'd be interested to see how those get taken forward within the combined authority in due course. So that was all I wanted to say to the Chair's remarks. Right, next, moving on to the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 4th of October. First of all, factual accuracy of those minutes. Are people happy that they're good? Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Lacker as well, thank you. So I think we can approve those minutes. In terms of matters arising and actions, I think we've covered off a number of the points. I think it's probably just worth formally noting that the 21-22 accounts were signed and approved on the 31st of October. That's in relation to item 23. I think there's still an outstanding action around succession planning for Grant Thornton, which is in the action plan, which, given where we are, I suspect needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
I can tell you if you'd like me to, Nacho.
Well, there was a name in the spreadsheet from the PSAA, which I noticed. So maybe I'm assuming that's who it is, therefore.
I have to admit, I've not checked that spreadsheet directly, because I know that it's based on early versions of submissions. Proposal is that my colleague Lauren Griffiths will take up the engagement lead role, and also in terms of the manager for the audit, as Helen has been promoted to director, that's going to be Zach Francis. So, having had this conversation with Louise, we'll look to get meetings in diaries for introductions.
Okay, thanks very much. And that was the name in the spreadsheet, so thankfully. Okay. There was a section obviously on Woking Borough Council, which we'll pick up in the Treasury Management Report, and there is also a report on the issue to do with Buckingham Group contracting as part of this month's agenda. Thank you for the strict job on the new internal audit department as well. Thank you, which we're covering. And I think that was it. I think it's proposed that we get a further update on the arm's length companies at our March meeting. That's what's set out in the action plan. Okay. So any other matters arising or anything else from the action plan? I say I think it was just the succession planning was the only outstanding point from that. Any other comments?
I think it was just the audit structure. I think in the action list, I think it's already there.
It is in the paper, yeah. So it just wasn't captured on the actual action plan. But very good. Okay, thank you. Right, which I think brings us to the issue of the annual report and accounts for 22-23. And obviously the recommendations are set out on page 11 of our pack. Because we're not quorum, we won't be able to actually take forward those, but we will obviously note our recommendations. But is this, you're going to take us through this, Linda, or is it Louise?
Well, I just wanted to open by saying, just thank you very much to the finance team and the audit team. I think despite the fact that we're later than I normally like us to be, actually we're earlier than a lot. So pleased to be able to present these today and the audit findings, the interim audit findings report. I'll hand over to Louise if you want to just give a quick overview before we hand it back.
Well, just on noting that in that PSA report, it said there were only 5 out of 467 authorities that signed their accounts off by October. So that's behind the comment you just made.
Spot on, and actually I think they've hit double figures now, so there are some authorities that have achieved 22-23 sign up, but I'm not going to say too much about the accounts this morning. Obviously with the committee not being quorate, we won't be able to approve them this morning, but it is part, just to confirm, it is part of ARAC's role within the terms of reference to approve the annual accounts. So the covering report refers to one outstanding matter. So this is the pensions asset. So for the first time, in common with a number of other local authorities, we found ourselves with a pension asset rather than deficit for the 31st of March 23 positions. That's an outstanding matter that we're working with Grant Thornton to finalise. And also the pension fund assurance will be provided within 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, that's nodding. So those are the 2 outstanding matters. So we're aiming to get that work finalised this side of Christmas, but clearly the accounts won't be approved now until January. And of course the report also presents the audit findings report and the auditor's annual report for 22-23, which also covers the value for money assessment for the combined authority. Importantly, there's no significant weaknesses to share with members in that report. There are some improvement recommendations which are set out in the detail, and that's all I wanted to say really. I'll just hand over to Grant. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. I suppose the only other comment is the one we've wrestled with in the past, is just making sure everything is as up to date as it needs to be in the narrative reporting. And I did flick through the accounts, and there are still a few things that are the tense that is used in the narrative reporting clearly needs to be updated, because things that are described as going to happen now have happened, as it were. So we just need to make sure we pick up those when we go through the accounts. Just for members' benefit, you know, the pension asset you've probably seen is a 59 million asset and a reserve, and that's the topic that the magnitude of the topic that Louise referenced. Okay, well, unless there's any other comments,
Could I just be clear on that, so that it's not there's an issue, it's just that we're just deciding between us how it needs to be accounted for, because most of the time all pension funds are in deficit, and it's very clear between the accountants and the auditors how you account for a deficit, but actually we've got an asset. So it's about how do we account for it is what we're.
Yes, yeah.
That's an issue with it.
I completely understand, and this lovely guidance that CITFA issued last week isn't exactly clear as to how you account for it, even though it's been issued. So it tells you what you need to consider, but doesn't tell you how. That's my reading of it. But Grant, you will comment on that, I'm sure, in a moment. But no, completely. I just wanted to make sure committee members knew, you know, the draft accounts you have in front of you at the moment do recognise an asset. Question is whether it is appropriate to recognise an asset under the current guidance, and that's the outstanding issue bit, is it? Councillor Martin.
Oh, thank you. President.
Yes, please.
I agree, given the problems in local government, auditing this is a great position to be in, and coming to committee to approve this time.
Councillor Martin,
You can't approve it until January.
In the middle.
Oh, this one.
Yes,
the
that's
one,
it.
yeah.
Perfect, you're on. There you go.
Sorry, I agree. Given the problems in local government, auditing this is a great point to be at. Thank you for your hard work.
There is one unadjusted item that external audit have found involving the capitalisation part of the metro spend, which should have been written off in the year, but I'm sure they'll correct this. It's not material to the audit, but I'm sure it will be corrected. The auditors have several improvement recommendations, I note, which is fairly standard, but the financial stability is the main one. To note regarding your reserve levels and ensuring these are built up over a reasonable time frame. So could I ask for assurance that measures are in place for this to happen? And then my third and last point, the governance recommendations are in hand on the forward plan and improving the economy effectiveness. Recommendations, I'd like to say that the recommendations are very similar to Walsall councils. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I think that the one that I acknowledged, the one and the third one, the one that needs a response is the one around the reserves. So yeah, so Grant and I did speak about this. The authority does maintain a very low level of general fund reserves. That's because all the money that comes into the combined authority, most of it, I think it's 93% of the money that comes in, excluding the transport levy, is grant funding, which means that it comes in and you either have to spend it or you have to pay it back. There's no room for me to stick it on the balance sheet and create a pot of reserves. The only money that comes in, therefore, that if I underspend against it, we generate a pot of reserves, is from the constituent authorities' fees and transport levy. So the conversation that I have every year, certainly with the Met Authority finance directors, and the approach that we've taken previously, is that because legally and financially the authority is completely underwritten by the 7 Met authorities. So if everything went wrong, and I got it all wrong, and we went bankrupt, actually legally the financial we're not going to, it's fine. But if I did get it all wrong, and legally we are underwritten financially by the 7 metropolitan councils, so they'd have to step in. And then it would be remiss of us, I think, and this is the conversation I have with your authorities every year, in order to generate a surplus, I've sort of got to over levy. And if I over levied, well, actually that affects your core spending power at your metropolitan authorities. And actually it's your FD's views that they would rather us stay lean on the levy and manage that within than to the sort of Met authorities, you keep the money, than me creating a big pot of unused reserves that actually it could have been better spent, in their opinion, in your own metropolitan authorities. So that's a reason why we do have such low levels of general reserves. That said, you will see we do have specific reserves set aside. 2 things in particular, over the last couple of years, because patronage has been falling, we got agreement through the CA board that where we are underspending on concessionary travel payments, we've been setting those aside into a specific resilience reserve for transport operations. And then also we've had some Treasury windfall that this will come on to in a bit, that we've also got agreement to the CA board to set aside on the balance sheet as a bit of a resilience there, and actually we're using 5 million of that to underwrite next year's budget, and again to sort of keep the fees and the levy down. So we have got some resilience on the balance sheet. I think I've got about 65 million sitting there on now at this point. In specific reserves. It's just the general fund is kept very, very low. So I'm comfortable with where we are. I think I don't know, Grant, you want to come in about, because it was your specific recommendation on this.
Shall we pick it up should we actually go through your report in the order that it's presented, and then you can pick that specific point up?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Chair, because I think, well, myself and Helen, we're going to do short presentations on both papers.
Yeah.
And then I can look to pick up both the reserves bit, which I was going to have a comment on anyway, which it actually does resound. It's similar to what Linda was saying. And then also we can try and pick up. I'll also try and pick up the issue that the councillor raised around membership of our act, which I'm not quite sure does apply to the position, but we'll come on to that as well. So, so I suppose in a way, if we start off then in terms of you've got two main reports in front of you today: our audit findings report, or a draft audit findings report, and the annual auditors report. And I'm going to take you through the audit findings report. As we're saying, we are close to finishing the audit, and I'm not going to say it's a success, because we would rather have signed off by the end of September, but we are fairly well progressed in comparison to other authorities. We were aiming for sort of mid-December to sign off. Now, clearly, we will still, in our view, plan to get all the work finished by mid-December. That's still what we're looking to do. But the ultimate, given the issues around quoracy, and we do pick that point up around sickness and everything like that, it will now have to be January before we can formally sign. But we'll go through that process. I'll just quickly pick up on the pensions one before handing over to Helen. Around, we are going through that process of IFRIC 14. Again, just to stress, there's not an issue with it. It's actually the technicality of how you account for what value should go into the balance sheet. There's something called IFRIC 14 that you might have an asset ceiling cap, so it might be slightly less. And even so, when you do look at the SIP guidance, there's also an obscure potential, hopefully rare, where you could end up even having to increase the liability even though you've got an asset, which it's quite a technical process. As Linda was saying, it's not something the sector's had to deal with, and actually it's something that's relatively rare in the commercial sector as well. So that's why, in a way, the guidance has been evolving over the autumn and summer and autumn periods. We've now got a way forward as a firm, and we're going through that process now. So once we've got through that process, we'll then discuss further with Louise and Linda around what we think the impact that might be. Hopefully none, but we haven't finished that piece of work yet.
Okay.
So I'll now pass over to Helen, who will take you through the audit findings report, and then I'll pick the annual auditors report.
Thank you.
Right, morning everybody. It's quite a lengthy report, so I'm going to take it, you've read it, and I'm going to talk you through the sort of key highlights and bits that maybe have moved on since when we've written this report. Obviously, we write the report in the papers and then audit work continues, so things can move about a little bit. So just to sort of update you on those. So I'm first going to take you to what is my page 3, which is the headlines page, and that details the work that is still sort of ongoing. So investments, not a significant amount of work that's waiting for third-party confirmations, essentially, and we'll look to maybe do some alternative procedures if we can't follow those up, although I think we've made some progress on that since writing the report. Creditors is probably the area, aside from grants, which I'll come on to, which has caused more work than we've done in previous years. As members will be familiar with, we do a sample approach, a substantive sample approach. So the first sample we took of creditors, we found a number of errors in there, which when we evaluated suggested that there wasn't enough assurance over the population. So we've then look to undertake a further sample of creditors to try and gain that level of assurance that we need. Middle of last week, I think we had one query outstanding. There was still some fails in that top up population. So we were looking then about evaluating that and what does that tell us about the population and what sort of error is that looking like. So that work is still, we're in that evaluation stage now, I think it's fair to say. In terms of group boundary confirmation, you'll note from the report that actually the group accounts and the single entity accounts are not materially different this year. So what that brings into sharp focus is just making sure that that group boundary is absolutely spot on in terms of if there is any entities that haven't been included that should be included, then that obviously changes the amount of audit work that we would need to do. So I think we were waiting for one set of draft accounts to be able to confirm that. I'm not going to talk about pensions because we talked quite a lot about pensions, and the position remains unchanged. So we are working through that both with the finance team and looking at the technical arrangements. But you are not alone in that, and we are working through that on lots of audits. Grants, members will remember that we had some lengthy conversations around grants and REFCUS last year, and the situation is largely unchanged in terms of the audit trail remains incredibly complicated, very much generated by spreadsheets and links to spreadsheets and links to different information. So we've continued to have quite significant problems in terms of picking the right samples and getting the right level of assurance around that. It's been a very lengthy process. We spent a lot of time discussing with officers how best to get the assurance we need. We have largely completed that work. There remain just a couple of queries around both of those for us to be able to finally conclude in that area. Minimum revenue provision. At the time of writing the report, it was outstanding, but you'll see later on in the report that we actually managed to resolve that issue. Okay. And the issue was around, again, the same as we had in the prior year in terms of technically, in accordance with the guidance, you are not putting away enough of a provision to cover third-party loans. However, what the authority does do, we've considered remains prudent, because you put a different provision in to account for loss, and you have a first charge on the assets. So we are comfortable that, if you like, it's in line with the spirit of the legislation, even though that legislation is technically saying you should put an MRP side. So there was quite a lot of conversations around that. And we have now managed to resolve that issue.
Well, I recall from last year that there was the expectation that the guidance would change, and that still is where we are as well.
That is exactly where we are. Yeah, the consultation has happened. It's in D-Look. They need to change the regs. It's not made it to the top of the pile, I think it's probably fair to say.
Yeah, but we still believe that what we're doing will be in accordance with or consistent with the guidance we expect to come out in due course.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, and the reason it caused us a little bit more of a conversation this year is the difference is material this year, whereas it hasn't been in prior years. So it's required us to go through a few more hoops from a risk management point of view on that side, just to make sure that we remain comfortable with that. But we've done all of those. We've done all of those things, so that point is actually cleared down. And then we talk about final review of the financial statements, and Chair will pick up your point around the narrative report and making sure that that's all up to date at the point of signing. So that gives you a bit of an overview in terms of where the whole audit is effectively.
Can I just ask management to comment on the creditors point, because that's new. I think I don't recall any issues of that nature previously. Yeah. The issues that we seem to be having non-compliant samples.
Yes, there's 38 items in the first sample, and there wasn't enough assurance, so there was a second sample, but we've not got to the end of that yet. But we are working towards identifying improvement recommendations as well as management to make sure that those areas are not replicated in 23-24. That makes sense.
Yeah, the details in the report. I suppose that there seemed to be a significant number of duplicate. Well, in the sample, quite a number of potentially duplicates payments, which is obviously concerning for more than just an accounting perspective.
Yes, absolutely concerning. But I think the majority were actually refunds that had been received and were still sitting on supplier accounts. But there was evidence of some duplicate payments as well.
Okay.
So So, I mean, I was going to pick up on the creditor point because, yeah, as you say, it's the first time really we've had those sorts of issues around sample evidence, and you'll notice the one sort of unadjusted error that has arisen this year was around the data testing as well, and similar issues in terms of the initial sample that we did. We identified a number of fails where there wasn't the right evidence, and so we did some more sampling around that. We got to a point where we were happy we got enough assurance, but then we'll do a statistical extrapolation to look at what is the potential error in the population, and that's what's recorded as an unadjusted error. So we've had some sort of challenges around both the debtors and the creditors evidence that we've been provided with this year. I did sort of highlight the issues we've had around grants, and the audit trail around that has been complicated. We've worked, really closely with officers to get to that point, but it's been quite time consuming. We've also had, and again, it picks it up in the report around the journals, and just in terms of making sure that when running the report and that level of understanding of the information that's coming out of the system, there prove some real challenges around getting that first cut of information. Once we've actually got to the point of sample testing, the evidence has been provided as initially was not what we'd expect, but then subsequently we've managed to resolve all of those issues around journals. So there's been a few issues this year around that provision of information, understanding those audit trails, being really clear that finance officers are able to articulate what is happening with what in your situation is actually some pretty complicated transactions. What we find, particularly with the transactions that we're looking at, it's not the same sort of transactions that we might see elsewhere. I think Linda alluded to, it's money coming in and it's money going out, and there'll be a part of a much bigger project, and there'll be a number of people involved in that. So in terms of getting to the evidence, it's been quite a complicated process, which tends to lead to the sort of problems that we've been experiencing this year.
Yeah, that is definitely the sense coming through from your report, that there have been more challenges. I think clearly the fact that we only just signed off the 21-22 accounts clearly will have impacted on capacity within the team. But there's references here to the quality of the information you were presented with first time round, and ability to trace information through. We've talked about the creditors point. There's talk about quite a lot of reliance on one individual within the finance team in terms of their knowledge. I don't know if you want to make an initial response, but then I think maybe at the January meeting we should probably have a slightly more considered discussion on some of those points, because it does have a different tone to it this year. It's my sense.
I agree, and I think that is just reflective of the complexity and the development of the combined authority itself. And as I said, there's something like 93% of the money coming in is on individual different types of grants. The way that we fund things isn't just from one source. A lot of things are very straightforward in terms of metropolitan authorities and other local government places, which is that money comes in and from a certain thing. The complexity of what we do is that actually we've got multiple funding sources, funding specific projects and initiatives. And what we've agreed, you can see it in here. So there's a couple of things for me. One is the accounts payable and accounts receivable, so the creditors. We picked that up as part of, there was an update report last time, and then we picked that up as part of the internal audit, and we've set Louise the challenge to ensure that actually moves from satisfactory to hopefully at the best position on the accounts, the financial services team. Louise is currently, that's Louise to completely relook at how we are delivering the financial services. We've got an independent, or planning to bring in an independent company just to have a quick look and see whether or not how we can better streamline processes just because the volumes are just increasing, etc., and the team are struggling to cope. So there's an action plan already in place looking at creditors. In terms of the grants complexity, yes, we have moved forward slightly. Just for reassurance, in terms of it going through spreadsheets, the process ensures that all the balances are correct. So it's not that there's anything missing in the spreadsheets. It's quite difficult to trace, because when money comes in at a certain level, then it's got to be flipped into different ways in order to fund different parts of the authority's expenditure. Again, there is an agreed action plan, and again, we have brought in an additional financial accounting resource to try and streamline that. In fact, we have just done a review, and we have a sort of audit, an internal audit findings report for me and Louise to have a look at some of the issues that the team are facing, and therefore what action plan are we going to come up with in order that the grants will be better streamlined in the future. And then as well on the journals, as the audit recommendation says there, this is about us making sure, I think just with the level of churn, actually people are trying to do things very quickly. Actually, we need to take a step back, and the team needs to take a step back. That doesn't mean that they compromise the quality of the supported audit evidence. As Helen said there, actually, once you trace it all through, the audit evidence is there. That's not the issue. It's about them making sure that they put it in the first place. So it is. I do accept the findings. It does feel like but it is genuinely stretching the team. Layered on top of that, as you said, that we were still working on 21, 22 virtually throughout. So it was clashing in terms of resource. So we are on it, and I'm happy to bring back a report from myself and Louise to say, well, what are we doing to address this into next year?
Because I suppose that's we've already referenced the potential for the police and crime commissioner dimension, and then you've got the single devolution deal and everything that comes with that. So it does feel that the complexity and size of the organisation is significantly increasing, and if you need more resource to support you and enable you to, maintain the level of control we all want to see, then sure you would have our support.
So just to reassure from an executive team perspective, we have you see, you just mentioned the PCC, the single settlement with the investment zones and the growth zones coming in, all sorts of stuff. And actually we're actively discussing that as an executive team at the minute to look at, well, what is the mobilisation plan and the timeframes for this? What resources and skills are required? Does that need to change our governance at all? Does that need to change our systems? And do we need some additional resource, etc., in the organisation? So to assure committee that the mobilisation plan is currently actively being worked on at an executive team level.
Okay, thank you. You've raised the journals that I'm seeing with the while ago. 69 billion pounds of the journals have caught my eye. So,
Can I make a comment?
yes, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's just an issue of reserve. I think I am very much with Linda. This organisation wasn't set up to develop its own originally, yeah, we know. It was set up as an agent of the government, very much passing the money through to the local authorities. I think that's with a new deal coming up. Perhaps that will slightly change, because this will become as a mini government, perhaps more resources you need to admin that one. But as so far as concerned, I don't think there is an issue. 3 to 5%, I think, says in the report we need reserves, but this is slightly less. It doesn't make any difference to it. I think it's sound as it is. So I just support Linda's position for me.
Thank you. Adam, do you want to?
I was just trying to look through the report in terms of was there anything else I wanted to highlight, and I think I've covered everything. I suppose what it's important to remember is, the tone is slightly different, and there have been some difficulties and complexities, but actually when you look at the audit adjustments that are on there, they're not very big. We've got an unadjusted misstatement which isn't material. We know that there's likely to be some adjustments around pensions, but that is a national technical accounting issue. The actual adjustments we are proposing are a presentational nature and some additional narrative. So when we get there, we're generally finding things are okay. I think the story is it's quite difficult to get there because of the complexity, and because of because of the way things are set up. So we get there in the end, which I think members can probably take comfort from. It's just taking us quite a long time, and it's quite a complicated process to get to that point. So I suppose that's probably the sort of final message to sort of take away.
I think that's a very important message, though, that this committee hears. That the ultimate conclusions are, you know, as set out here. But as you say, the process could be enhanced, and the nature of the combined authority is going to mean that those processes, unless we put the resource in and have the processes refined sufficiently, will continue to be complicated. So understand. Can we pick up any specific, if you were, I'm going to present anything further?
Yeah, no, pick up anything else on the accounts, and then I'll let Grant and the report.
I think the only other quick MRP, I think we've touched on already, so I don't think we probably need to fish up on that. We'll talk about the creditors testing. There was just this, and Councillor Kay raised this, who couldn't join us today, unfortunately, because he has COVID, but this bank account, just to be reassured around this bank account, this is on page 159 or page 33 of your report, that there was a bank account that we became aware of through the what is written here is that as part of the confirmation process, we became aware of a bank account. And I think Councillor Cove just wanted a reassurance that there were no other bank accounts that we should be identifying and hadn't.
That's correct. There are no other bank accounts.
Good.
This was a Lloyd's bank account, and it was Mark's actually online. I think it was like an overnight facility, and we were paid some interest of only a couple of £100. Mark, can you confirm?
Can I just say, because I don't think it was that we weren't aware of the bank account. I think it's actually that we were that he hadn't.
The working paper missed.
The working paper missed. Oh, okay. There was £200 interest had been paid into the account.
Okay.
I think I can confirm all of that. So I think you've covered it there.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the audit adjustments, page 160 or 34 of your report? Is it a complete coincidence that 1.63 million, or am I missing something?
It's a complete coincidence. I've checked it more than once. Grant has asked me, "Are you absolutely sure?" Yes, I am absolutely. Complete coincidence that they're the same numbers.
Okay. And then there seems to be a slight disagreement as to whether the second adjustment for the prior, but that's a prior year point, isn't it? So we don't need to go over that again. Okay. I don't think I had any further questions, so I'll throw it open to other members of the committee for any other questions on the first Grant Thornton report. The other questions, queries?
I have a question on the internal audit report.
I think that's the next one they're going to come on to in a minute. That's okay. So can I just clarify? As I say, I would like to just confirm in terms of the responsibility of this committee and whether it's approving, whether that's part of its terms of reference or whether it's recommending approval. If I could just ask that you clarify back to us before we get to the point of. You can comment now if you wish.
Probably most appropriate for me to comment on that one. My understanding is that the board, WMCA board, delegated approval of the statement of accounts to this committee in December 2018.
28.
It might be 17. Check the Friday, the 8th of December. Sorry, 2017. There was a specific report that went to the WMCA board dealing with the delegation of the statement of accounts, and that was endorsed at that meeting.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure that the terms of reference therefore have been updated.
They reference it in the training because members of the committee will be provided training in relation to the sign off of accounts. It's something that Dan and I have discussed. We can amend the terms of reference to reflect that.
Thank you very much.
I think the training bit was followed up, I think, as well, as a recommendation from the, it was followed up.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Right, Grant, back to you for the second report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Probably just to bring that circle to a flow, just to comment on, we are proposing an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. Okay, just to bring that full circle. I know that's where we are at the moment in terms of that once we finalised our work. So that's just bring that all together, really, that's where we are at the moment. So I was going to now take you through, I suppose the other part of the two main parts of the public sector audit are one, statement of accounts audit, and the second part is around the sort of value for money, the economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And that's actually covered in our annual auditors report. And I'll try and pick up some of the comments that members have raised already in terms of that. Just to remind members, in terms of the statutory framework, we have to give a commentary on the authorities' arrangements under specified criteria. So hence you get financial sustainability, governance, and economy efficiency and effectiveness. And as part of that, we considered whether there are any significant weaknesses in the authorities' arrangements for those. I think just because I think I said last year, it is slightly different to what the National Audit Office might do in central government, where they actually look at outcomes. We're looking at arrangements. I'm not saying we wouldn't comment on outcomes, but it's not specific out in responsibility, but it's looking at the arrangements you've got in place that would drive outcomes is what we look at. And also, I suppose, we are recognising back in 22-23, the authority is about to enter, and also into 23-24 and 24-25, an unprecedented period of opportunity and growth under its Trailblazer, Evo deal, and other investment and I suppose in a way picking up the revised HS2 program as well. So there will be heightened risks that you'll be needing to manage, and we'd have commented there is some financial fragility among some of your member councils. And I suppose particularly we've highlighted Birmingham City Council, and I'm not picking them out, but they're the one who has issued a 114 notice and everything like that. So you're managing in a sort of a higher risk environment overall. Our conclusions are summarised on page 3 of that report, on page 177 of your pack. And just to reiterate, I think as said earlier, we have not identified any significant weaknesses in the authority's arrangements. I think as we continue to build our knowledge of your VFM arrangements, and under the new code, we've been getting in more depth as we've been going on year on year. It's not surprising, I suppose, that we've identified more improvement recommendations as that's gone on, and that's got its increase from 2 last year to 8 this year. I think I'd just like to reiterate, I don't see that as that's indicative of deterioration in arrangement. I think it's just a matter of reflection as the size and complexity of the authority grows. As government is channeling more funding through you, therefore you need to look at those and continue to adapt and evolve going forward to meet those challenges and requirements. So they're improvement recommendations and not, as we will say, key recommendations, which offer significant risks. So but quickly looking at those the 3 key areas. In terms of financial sustainability, in 22-23, you finished up with a positive 2.8 million variance to your budget, and you're forecasting break even for 23-24. Picking up on the conversation we had around reserves, given the 22-23 performance, you were able to replenish those reserves through transfers from surpluses to reserves. And as Linda has said, the level of reserves is comparatively low. But I think we do have to bring into consideration, as you've heard, the fact of you don't have to assume the same level of risk as a council might do in terms of those levels of reserves, because of the way you're funded. And if you look at the sort of year-end position for the general reserve balance, it's actually like 3.6% of your proposed sort of constituent authority contributions. So that does fall within that sort of 3 to 5% range that goes in the budget. So I think overall we are saying it is low, but actually when you consider the specific funding arrangements of the authority, and as you're saying, the majority comes from grant funding, in terms of the variable bit, you are close to being in the range. I'm sure that Linda was saying, well, the 3 to 5% range would be helpful to get to. And I think our recommendation on that is actually forward-looking, more into when you get the single settlement, because then things may well change in terms of the way the funding and the expectations on you. So it's meant to be more forward-looking than backward-looking in terms of the recommendation around reserves, as you understand exactly what the requirements are going forward. And that's why we just sort of say that you need a level of proportionate to your revenue spend going forward, to protect it against financial risk. In terms of governance, we're satisfied you have reports that come to you around risk management arrangements, and that's been guided by your strategic risk management framework. We did raise a sort of recommendation around the presentation of those strategic risk registers, probably linking it more into corporate objectives, so you can easier for people to see. But again, it's an improvement recommendation and not a significant issue from our perspective. We did conclude you had an adequate internal audit function. A lot of 22-23 was still under the City of Wolverhampton, and you are adapting those going forward. I think we have made one recommendation around need to update your code of conduct, and it's not been updated since about 2018, I don't think. And also, I suppose, you know, when you begin to adapt your new in-house arrangements, you will be due for under the public sector internal audit standards. You have to review internal arrangements at least every 5 years. So there's a recommendation around making sure that you pick that up, because I think the last one was like 18-19. So it's coming up the agenda again to pick that up going forward. So there's sort of a recommendation around that one. We did look at in terms of the audit committee, and I think this is where the question comes in around SIPFA did publish back in 2022.
Before we go into that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Come on.
Sorry, just
Yeah.
before going further, I think I was slightly mind-boggled, though now you made the sort of comment is forward-looking. When I saw this red sort of traffic light stuff for the significant weakness identifying and key recommendations made further, obviously. I was just trying to understand. I didn't really understand. Can you give us a little bit more understanding on
Right, so sorry, on the front page, on page 3,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
use a rag rating, green, amber, and red. Red have a significant weakness. So there are no reds on that front page. They're all ambers and greens.
Yeah.
And effectively, it's a fairly sort of one side or the other. Is if you get an improvement recommendation, it's amber, and if you have no improvement recommendations, you're green.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
So in simplistic terms, that's the way that page works. So that's why it looks like your amber's done all of them, because there's an improvement recommendation in each area. I think one's moved from green to amber because there were no recommendations last year, but there's one this year around. It is forward looking, but that's why it's amber rather than green. And I think that's what. But I think reds are where you get concerned. There are no reds there, so that's why we say there are no significant weaknesses in the arrangement.
Thank you.
And I'm coming back to picking up on the arrangements for the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. There have been conversations around this table, I think, ever since I've been your auditor, around the way it had to be constructed under the Constitution and the framework and the number of people. But I think what we're just sort of saying here, if you look at the audit, the SIPFA's guidance, it recommends audit committees generally, once you get above 8 people, they begin to get difficult in terms of keeping sure people are trained and et cetera, et cetera. So we're just playing that out here to go, if you have opportunity, and I know it has to go through, my understanding is it has to go through sort of primary legislation and through regulation to get changes through. So, but I think we are playing that out here, that trying to get something that works for you in that relationship in terms of numbers going forward. I know you've touched upon independent members. Clearly, you're an independent member. I think the guidance does suggest it should be 2.
Yeah.
I think I would look at that appropriately in terms of, well, trying to recruit 2 people. I mean, I know it's difficult in the sector to actually get the level of interest, but also I think that comes back to one of the recommendations in here around is sort of doing an annual assessment of skills and knowledge around the table, because really those independent members are to sort of provide continuity, but also plug those skill gaps. So that's why one of the recommendations is, well, understand what skills you've got within the committee itself before you launch into saying we must have a second one. I don't think they're legislating at the moment. I think there's talk about government maybe bringing regulations in to make it formal, but it's not gone down that line yet. So the SIPFA is good practice, best practice. So it's not a statutory guidance. So I think you need to look at that in the context of yourselves. And what we were saying, and I think this picks up on the question that came up earlier around making sure that there is a distinction between, I suppose, and there's a typo in here. I think we use cabinet, that should be board in terms of the recommendation at the back. I think that's where I think that's what I was saying in terms of someone from the board shouldn't be sitting on our act within 2 years of coming down from the board effectively. If I understood the question earlier correctly, I think because you were on a constituent authorities cabinet, I don't think that's because you're not. It's the audit committee of the body, I think, is where the guidance is raising it. I think you're one step removed, but if you're on board, then that might be sorry.
So shall I comment on behalf? Because sort of. So the thing that caught our eye was this is page 188, second paragraph on the left hand side. It says institute a rule that a period of 2 years should elapse before a councillor who previously held a senior policy role joins ARAC. And that was the question that we had, and why Councillor Jones is excusing herself from this part of this discussion, because she clearly did have a senior policy role in the authority prior to this year. And so I do think that is something that we should consider as part of our review.
And part of the reason why actually this report is draft at the moment is we're looking to get feedback as that. So in that sense, so we can come back and reflect upon it. I think it's for you. I mean, I think it's really to what do you need mitigation in place? I don't think it's there's an idea between good practice and actually what happens. You know, I think it's whether you have undue influence potentially, I suppose, on decisions that you may have been part of effectively. And I suppose how you might mitigate that. If we need to mitigate that. So I think that's where the recommendation is coming from, as being good practice and developing that going forward.
Okay, thank you. I think there are a number of interesting recommendations for us to consider here. You know, I'm aware of the sit for guidance around 2 independent members. Obviously, the basis on, you know, if we were to move away from having the current structure, you know, at the moment we have 7 representatives from the 7 constituent members and an independent. You're already at 8. You would add another 8, and we have a business representative, and we have representatives from the non-constituents. So I understand the basis of the recommendations, but I also sort of understand why the combined authority has the structure it currently has in place. So, but I think they're important recommendations for us to consider.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing. I think that's what you consider. I don't want to get caught up on what is the right number per se. You need the right number for yourselves as an authority. I think maybe where if there's anywhere to look at is the level of coracy, I think, potentially. I'm not saying clearly I don't want 2 members to make a decision, but it is that level of what's a reasonable level of coracy, I think, because that's where you did get a little bit caught up. But I mean, I think the absolute figure is down for you. Well, what do you think is the most appropriate for giving you the assurance you need?
Can I ask, sorry, thanks, Chair. Can I ask the issue of, is there any guidance on the coracy, how far we could go? I'm from SIPO, because I'm not aware of it, because we are they're saying, well, suggesting 8 members. And I'm thinking, well, do we have 50% or 1/3 of it? So I'm just thinking, make sure that the system works. If it make it 1/3, then people like today, we are not making decisions. Otherwise, we would have been. If it's 1/3, then so I think that, is there any guidance on that, if please?
I don't have access to immediate guidance. I think I might look to your governance. I mean, I think I'd ensure it was probably consistent across your committee structure. So whatever your other committees are core, it would be sensible, I suppose, to have it consistent. I mean, I have to admit personally, 1/3 sounds reasonable to me, but again, I don't think there's anything written down. It has to be. I know you'll have overall political proportionality stuff that's written into statute and stuff like that around makeups, things like that, for councils element. But I don't think there's anything particularly around chorus. I think that's your decision and what people would see is reasonable.
As I say, I think given a number of issues and the expansion of the responsibilities of the combined authority, I think this is and I know it is, because this also got raised at the last combined authority board meeting. And actually there isn't consistency across the committees. There is actually, I didn't know this until Dan pointed it out to me, but there's an inconsistency between overview and scrutiny and ARAC at the moment as to how coracy is determined. So I think this is a topic that you are going to be considering and exploring and coming back with recommendations on.
Yeah, and it might just help just to clarify a few points. So the issue around coracy affects audit committee and our 2 scrutiny committees, because they are the 3 meetings where the CA doesn't have local discretion. So the regulations establishing the CA said that you must have an audit committee and you must have at least 1 scrutiny committee, and all of those meetings must have a coracy of 2/3 of its membership. In respect of all of our other committees, investment board, housing and land board, etc., that's left to local discretion. So the CA itself sets the coracy, which, as Grant said, is normally around 1/3, certainly a lot lower. So this committee and the scrutiny committees have historically and continue to have issues around coracy, and those problems are the same as other combined authorities in the country who are in a similar position where their audit and scrutiny committees have a statutory 2/3 quoracy level and the rest of the meetings don't. So there is that issue where we don't have local discretion, and the government and civil servants have been reluctant to move on that particular issue, but it would need to be from the government to us rather than being able to do anything ourselves. Jay, your point is around voting members, and yes, again, there is some there is local discretion and on a committee by committee basis, so it's not consistent. So, for example, on this committee, the non-constituent members vote. On the scrutiny committee, they don't vote, and I think that sort of inconsistency has been reflective of how the CA has developed and grown since 2016, and it might be that actually it's appropriate to review and have a greater level of consistency across all the meetings.
On that point, Chair, can I suggest Dan take to the board on that issue? Not just here, probably it's all over the country. This is a problem. That the government should be, we should be lobbying them in a way to make it work, because it's not working, so it has to be fixed one way, rather than saying, well, it has to be 2/3. Why can't we have 1/3 instead to make it work?
And it is to reassure members, it is a matter that we lobby every year over, and not just West Midlands, say Greater Manchester, Liverpool, and the other combined authorities have exactly the same problem. It unfortunately has fallen on deaf ears, but that doesn't mean we don't raise it every time there's an opportunity to raise it. So it is very much a continuing issue. It's just one that we haven't been able to get any traction on, but we'll continue to try.
Thank you, Dan. Do you want to just comment on the last recommendation?
Well, not
Series of recommendations.
Oh yeah, the last area is around flood economy efficiency and effectiveness. I think it's important to note successes in 22-23. I suppose we've highlighted Commonwealth Games as being one that transport infrastructure, etc., where you supported that was important. I think it's also important that as part of our work, we do have conversations with senior officers, including and also with the mayor, and we're comfortable that or happy that it's clear that working closely with partners and developing relationships still is a key theme behind the combined authority. In terms of arrangements for 22-23, you have updated your performance monitoring system that does better connect your performance and finances. They now include sort of monitoring the revenue impacts of the capital programme as well by regular financial reports, so that you're getting much better at linking the performance with the finances. And also, so looking forward, you've got your combined authorities plan for growth. You've got the investment perspective, your net zero 5-year plan, and a new local transport plan. And they all demonstrate that you're primed, I suppose, to drive the change you're going to need going forward into the new sort of devolution arrangements and strategic going forward. What we have said around procurement, and it's which you picked up earlier, the way overall you operate procurement hasn't changed significantly, but there have been upgrades to your processes, certainly around implementing procurement-focused assurance processes, and those hopefully to streamline. I think we use the word rubber stamp, but I mean once a decision been made, that you're not holding yourselves up in terms of getting it through the process. You've also got your new social value policy in place. And that's now being used on all of your procurement looking forward. The one thing we have commented upon is there a formal procurement overarching strategy? And we think that's lacking at the moment. We've seen it, obviously, other authorities. And then that reporting, I suppose, of procurement to committee level, we believe is an improvement area as well. And therefore, we've raised recommendations in those sort of two areas.
Can I just maybe see on procurement? I'm a bit surprised that we didn't develop the procurement strategy. Sorry, it's not a criticism. It's just a general issue. When there's a procurement, nobody knows how it's being working. It's piecemeal rather. Otherwise, I think it's good to have a procurement policy or strategy rather, not policy. It's a strategy how we deal with it. Because it's all private, it can't be scrutinized with by the scrutiny that way, because it has to be private, because many contracts and so on. So it has to be a strategy somewhere. So I think it's better that it should be done. I completely agree with that. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, so it is on my list. So we do have regulations around how we procure, whether that's public procurement regulations, and we have our own standing orders that governs how do people do things and to make sure they're compliant with regulation. We also have an individual procurement strategy for every piece of work that they do is on a major, if it's major spend. So there are individual procurement strategies. What is absolutely lacking is an overarching procurement strategy for the organisation. Now, procurement was one of the functions that has probably suffered, I think, from the expansion of the CA over the last 5 years without actually having the investment in it in terms of staff and resourcing. So since they came into the company 2 years ago, what we've done is we've completely restructured the procurement team, both in terms of capacity and capability. We have just on the back end of finally recruiting to the resource in the procurement team, and this is essentially next job on Brad's list, who is our new head of procurement, is to develop a procurement strategy. Key for me is that ability for us to drive value out of doing things more holistically. The reason why I have the procurement team sitting within our investment and commercial team is actually that will drive some more commercial procurement opportunities. So absolutely, it is on the list. It's for Brad to do, but to be fair, we've had to sort of take a step back, relook at the team, redesign the team, and then recruit to it. And I think we've got a couple of vacancies left now that are coming out, but once they're up and running, particularly important for when we move into single settlement as well, because that'll probably bring some really good opportunities there.
I'd say I would was Telford and Reekin who did the presentation at their last West Midlands Audit Committee's chair. So it was a really good presentation.
Yeah,
So
it was. Yeah.
I'd certainly commend Brad talking to them.
Okay.
That would be great. I had one other point I was going to ask you just to briefly comment on, Linda, which is on page 183 or 9 of this report. There's the reference to the 250 million of additional funding coming out of the don't know how to describe it. Network stabilisation. It was a point that you made, obviously, at the discussion around the budget the other day, and it's a pretty important point in terms of short to medium term financial stability.
Yes.
Do you want to just update people here?
Yes. So as part of as Claire said, part of the opening scrutiny briefing on the budget, we have a underlying medium-term financial pressure arising from the transport element of the budget as a result of the announcements from the HS2 and Network North additional money. As a region, we've got various sums of money which we can take you through when we bring you an update on the budget. But certainly, we got additional revenue of £250 million over the next 5 years for network stability. So that has brought us some breathing space in terms of the medium-term financial plan, and it will certainly allow us to balance the budget over the next 3 to 4 years while we take a longer-term look at the future of public transport provision. That will include us continuing to work with government about, because it's a national issue, not just an issue in terms of the West Midlands, in terms of that gap between what a commercial network would look like versus actually what do we want an entire network look like, an entirely socially inclusive network to look like. So the 250 million has helped considerably buying that space in terms of the financial sustainability over the medium term.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's set out on the table on page 183, which committee members hopefully find reassuring. Can I just say thank you again to Grant for this report? I found it really useful. Hopefully a lot of it was confirmatory, but it was really good to have it, brought together in this way. So thank you for that. And I absolutely recommend it. Welcome the recommendations, even if DLUC don't seem to. I think it is certainly good for us to begin things to think about, things that we could do differently or hopefully better as well. So I very much welcome the recommendation made. Invite other members of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask for an update? Sorry, I can't give you the page because my computer's coming down. I'm just relying on the notes I made prior to them. Of the audits recently completed, 3 of them have been the IR 35.
That's on internal audits actually. So
Yeah,
that's the next
the
part.
internal audit.
Yeah, that's 2 more items on the agenda.
That's fine. I'll leave
I'll
it till the
invite you to
end.
come in on.
Just let me know
Yeah.
when it comes up.
Yeah, no
because
problem at all.
My system's down.
It's all right, no problem at all. Any other questions for Grant Thornton on the 2 reports that they've issued and on their findings? Obviously, we look forward to your conclusions and obviously finalising the accounts as soon as we can. But note, you know, that we are substantially ahead of where we were last year and where it would appear many others are.
Yeah, I mean, we're now moved to finalise the annual audit report. Now we've gone through ARAC. I think we're taking that draft off of it, and we're probably, well, I'll talk to Linda about what papers go through to board. But we'll now should be able to certify the audit close as well. At the same time, we issue a statement of accounts because that's the work completed.
Great, thank you. Anything else?
No.
No, okay, very good. Right, if there was nothing else, we'll move on to Treasury. We are slightly behind, so for those presenting on the next 3 or 4 areas of the agenda, if one could keep it succinct and just introduce the topic and then obviously open it up to questions, that'd be great. So I think next we're on Treasury Management, and that's Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll keep this as brief as possible then. Before committee is the Treasury Management mid-year report for financial year 23-24, covering the period between April and September, and it's presented as one of 3 reports that we sent to ARAC during the course of the year, the previous report being the strategy and the final report later in the year. At a high level, there's been a net change in investments of £154 million during the period from April to September, and this is predominantly driven by 2 reasons. One, our continuing inflow of funds from capital grants received in advance of need, which I think have been mentioned earlier today. And secondly, following the drawdown of our Phoenix loan in August of the year of £100 million. You'll recall that this facility has been mentioned in prior reports to committee. It was organised in February of 2022 at a set interest rate at that point in time, but the cash itself was only drawn down in August. Because we fixed forward the interest rate, we have a notional interest saving, the difference between what rates were then and rates are now, of about £91 million over the course of the loan itself. From an investment perspective, we generated just over £15 million of investment income from April to September, and would look to generate similar returns during the rest of the financial year, possibly outturning at around £31 to £32 million in total. And I think possibly then I'll leave it at that as a brief overview and highlights of the report itself, and possibly take questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Just so committee members understand that the Phoenix loan is a 50-year loan, isn't it? Is that right?
Yes, 50-year in total, yes. But amortising, so parts of it are repaid over the course of that time.
So just so people understand how you can get a notional saving of £91 million on a £100 million loan, it's because it's a 50-year loan, okay? Just so people understand.
None of us will be here by then.
I don't know that needs to be mentioned, but anyway. Okay. And you know, one has to acknowledge again, you know, that an average interest rate on the portfolio borrowings of 2.93, given current base rates, and the level of return you're making, 30 million for the year. You know, those should be noted. What was the budget for this year in terms of investment income? You remember?
It's 22 million. So we will surpass budget by at least 10 to 12 million pounds.
Right. Again, to be noted and commended. Can I just? I think the only question I had was on 6.4. I think last time we talked about issues associated with Woking and Birmingham, so we won't go over those again. Thank you for putting in the appendix to the report, the forward commitments. But on 6.4, there's a reference to a control failure within the software. Can you just expand on that slightly? I don't know what that is or what it was.
Yeah, so I think this will also be following up with with an internal audit report as well. So I'm not sure how much detail I should go into now. Perhaps Linda might like to comment.
Yes, so it will be picked up in the internal audit report that's coming to the next committee. Essentially, the software that we use, there's a control within the software that's supposed to flag when we hit a limit at the £20 million per authority, sorry, per institution, and that wasn't in the software. It hadn't been triggered or switched on or whatever. So that will come into the next report. To reassure we are okay, but actually it did highlight, and we've actually that has now been corrected within the software. But we'll pick it up at the next committee in terms of the actions that we've taken. Okay,
thank you. Could I just ask, given how much additional funding is potentially coming into the authority and costs too and everything else, how big could the investment balance get?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're forward monitoring this monthly. I don't think it's going to get much bigger than it is at the minute, actually, because the money's over time rather than now. Okay. So as that money comes in, the rest of it will be sort of going out. So CRSTS to another 2.6 billion, but obviously we won't get that till year 6. Okay. Yeah, it should.
Yeah. If I reflect upon our longer term cash flow planning, we would actually expect to see balances fall over time. Clearly, you'd have to caveat that with unexpected windfalls over the next few years, as it may be. But we've probably reached, from our medium term forecasting planning, a high watermark now. And as long as expenditure goes as planned, we will start to see those balances fall.
Thank you. I don't think I had any further questions at this stage. Other members of the committee? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Your interest receivable performs well, and some of the loans to be repaid to West Midlands Combined Authority over the next few months will allow them to send the monies involved out at a higher interest rate. So meaning the outturn is likely to show a better position, am I correct? Will it show a better position? Yes.
Yes, it will. Yeah. So so I think as Mark's just said that actually, because we've got bigger balances, because the interest we're receiving on those balances means that we're getting a bigger amount in. So we flagged that in the last financial monitoring report to board. As I said earlier, what we agreed at board was to put some of that aside in terms of specific reserves for financial resilience, and also using some of that money that we've made this year to underpin £5 million worth into next year's revenues and that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Obviously, thank you for putting in a second appendix in, which is the forward commitments, which actually from December. Obviously, that still shows commitments beyond 1 month forward, which is where the new policy is going to be applied. I suppose my question is, how challenging is it going to be to just forward commit for 1 month ahead, given how much money is constantly being churned through the portfolio?
I think sorry, Mark, do you want to come in on that?
I can say from a practical level that there are many borrowers out there at this moment in time. So finding a counterparty wouldn't be difficult. It's the selection of the counterparty.
Okay.
And I think it is because we knew it was going to, we knew that action was going to require us to have more transactions, etc. Which is why we took the pressure off Mark by allowing us to sort of have a bit of space there in terms of the length of time that he could take to look at these things. So it has put more pressure on more transactions, but actually, in my view, given the reaction to the Woking issue, it was preferable to keep us on the side of the caution and safety than and to give Mark more work to do than to continue where we were.
I understand, and obviously we saw the news of Nottingham City Council the other day as well.
I was going to ask Chair on this,
Yeah.
has Mark looked at it, how many authorities in this list are in that position or likely to be in that position? Any issue?
Well, we regularly review, certainly going forward now, as we say, we've got this 1 month limit in place. We regularly review the counterparties that come to us, and we will select on the criteria that we work for at an operating level. And clearly there have been more reported stresses within the sector than there have been previously. We'd have to take each counterparty in turn as they approach us as a consequence.
And we only have Birmingham and Woking.
Yeah, so far, obviously, who knows?
There is no, there is no money out of Nottingham.
Okay, thank you. And just the auditor in me, the para 6.3 references a commitment from Birmingham City Council from 29 July 24 for 10 million, but that's not in the forward commitment schedule. Am I missing something there?
This, I'm apology that must have been omitted, but it goes beyond the end of the financial year, clearly, so wouldn't be within those ones up to the end of March next year.
Oh, okay, so the appendix 221 isn't all forward commitments then, it's only the ones up to the end of March, is it?
Yes, but there are very, very few actually into 24, 25.
Okay, I suppose next time's report, yeah, if we could just get the full population, as it were, that would be great, just so we have complete visibility of it. That'd be super. But again, I'm assuming the rates you're achieving on these clearly are more attractive, to Councillor Martin's point, than the rates that we were securing on the ones that are currently expiring. So, but if that appendix could be the full list and include rates, that'd be super. Thank you. Any other questions from Mark on the Treasury report? Thank you very much, and I say congratulations on forecasting 8 million more than budget.
I was going to say, well done. Yeah.
If we just pick up, there was one query that I just wanted to address in the email from.
Oh, yeah.
End.
Yes.
So there was a query in from Councillor Kay.
Yeah.
So he said something about it would not seem prudent or sustainable if WMCA should be borrowing to cover interest payments. I think that's it's misinterpretation of what we're saying. We don't borrow to cover interest payments. Essentially, what Mark was saying there is we were under borrowed. We've only borrowed what we needed and what was within our capital financing requirement. We try and hold off borrowing and use our cash so that we reduce our debt charges and hold our debt charges down. But it's always about a balance between when I borrow and when we hold cash. What we decided to do was we were under borrowed. We should have borrowed. We did borrow, and actually what that's meant is that we have as Mark said, saved the organisation £91 million in interest rates had we waited. So we're certainly borrowing for our capital finance requirement. We're not borrowing to cover interest payments.
Understand. Thank you. I think
we discussed earlier.
Yeah, we did discuss that earlier, but I think we do a response to Councillor Kay on a number of his questions. So we'll certainly include that. I did note in the Treasury report, you're not actually forecasting any further borrowings in the next couple of years, are you? So yeah,
because there was a second one on this about saying we're within the SITFA code of Treasury management. We are within the SITFA code of Treasury management.
Yeah.
The advice on the MRP is actually within our capital policy. This is a Treasury report. It's not capital policy, but as the auditor said, we are expecting the payment to the MRP regulations anyway.
Yeah.
And we are prudent within our MRP. And it's
the MRP is not an issue for this report that I'm presenting.
Yeah, thank you. I say, I think perhaps you and I together should formally respond to Councillor Kay's queries and incorporate those responses. Right, no other questions. Internal audit. Councillor Martin, this will be your moment in a second. So over to Lorraine.
Thank you. As you've asked us just to do a very quick brief introduction, we've got all the details contained within the internal audit update report. The key elements within there is this period we've completed the health and safety audit, which was a review to ensure compliance with the ISO 45001 accreditation that we hold. We're also heavily working on the key financial system, so there's 6 individual audits that's contained within there. The aim is those will be completed by the end of this year for reporting to committee in January.
In the calendar year.
So we're aiming to get them all completed by the end of this month.
Okay.
It's horrible to think we're already in December, isn't it?
I think we can tell. Yeah.
And on the follow-up, you can see there's 2 audits that at the moment have got audit actions that are outstanding, and I've provided a summary on the status of those. But I'm pleased to inform that we had an outstanding audit action with the MML audit that was outstanding for probably 12 months. That has now been resolved, along with the audit on the affordable housing. Section 5 of the report, I did a summary really of where we are currently on the audit plan and delivery of it. It's quite clearly at the moment we're not going to achieve it, but we have already done some initial work looking at the plan. We've got 2 new contractors that have joined us today, and as it's looking, our revision at the moment is looking like we will be able to achieve delivery of 60% of the plan at this stage. But I will review that in more detail and come back with a more detailed presentation on that next time.
So is that 60% by 31 March, or is it?
Yes.
Because I'd say there is, I sense that obviously we can continue to do some work up until the date we sign the annual governance statement in supporting the annual governance statement, which I think is important. This is so important to support that statement. Okay.
Can I just on this section 4? There's it's a small point. I'm trying to understand the gifts and hospitality. Why is that?
That report was presented at the last meeting. It was found it had a limited audit rating. There was 2 red audit recommendations that were identified. You recall what?
Well, there is, I'm just trying to understand. There's usually guidelines how much somebody can claim or gifts and so on. Is that altering? I'm just trying to understand that bit.
Yeah, I probably need to refer back to the report and share with you what the specific details were that gave that a red level.
Yeah.
I think the 2 issues were with regard to the arrangements for how officers were reporting. The system wasn't very robust.
I think it was just very outdated policy.
Yeah, I think that was the other.
Okay.
Yeah. So
nothing coming into the fraud in the end.
no, there was no fraud. And I can share the report with you again, Councillor, if you would like me to forward it over to you. And then the last item in the report is the new structure chart of the internal audit plan that was audit team that was requested at the last meeting. We have interviewed and managed to successfully offer jobs to all of those vacancies, with an aim that all roles will be, or all individuals will be in place before the end of this financial year, which will give us a good position, a good starting point for next year.
Absolutely.
Just a comment, Chair. I think this is very nice to see acknowledgement in the end for those who worked extra. That's very good. Thank you. Yeah. Just appreciating the work.
Councillor Martin, you want to raise your question?
Of the audits that you've recently completed, 3 of them being the IR 35, procurement exemptions and gifts and hospitality. I've only received a limited assurance, which does flag some concerns, and there is the one other, which was the previous audit, the Longbridge Park and Ride.
Right, yeah.
Income and management charging arrangements. There also has a redaction to be completed. Could I ask for an update of when these actions will be completed? As the report, it only includes the details on the IR 35 and not the other three, and I'm not sure why they're added more detail on the health and safety audit, which was only a medium risk item, which is scored satisfactory. Whether the other three are all high risk and are rated limited,
Okay.
Can you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the
rated
reason,
high and low.
yeah. So the reason we've provided more detail on the health and safety is because that audit is the one audit that has been just completed this period. Those others were completed at previous points in the year. We would have provided more detail of each of those audits at the time of presenting them initially to this committee. The Longbridge Park and Ride, all of the audit actions have now been completed. I know you can't see your screen any longer, but in the final column of that table, it does show you how many of the actions have been completed, and those are all done. On the procurement exemptions and the IR 35, those are still in progress. The procurement exemptions, the delivery date is due for the 31st of December 23. So if at the end of the year there are actions still outstanding that haven't been delivered, at the next meeting I will provide some commentary on why there's the delay in delivery of those, which I have already done on the IR 35. So completion of those audit actions was the 30th of September. There's some that haven't been completed as yet, and the reason for that is they have had to bring in some additional resource to support the activity developing a framework. But I've provided a summary within the report there just to cover why they've missed the target date that they'd originally set in the audit report.
Okay. Just picking up on a question again from Councillor Kay in his note, he was concerned that the report flags that whilst actually is a lot of positive comments around the process around health and safety. Actually, it was very reassuring to see. There is this slightly worrying comment that it says the review. Not all contractors undertake the training, and it is not known the number of staff this affects. And his concern was, to what extent is.
I think that's the report probably hasn't been written. Well, the gentleman who wrote it is a guy called Abdullah. So if I refer to Abdullah, the audit is done. When he's referring to contractors, he means contractors that are working within the combined authority in an officer capacity. My assumption of Councillor Kay's question is contractors doing maintenance or construction works either on the building or at another construction site.
Okay.
So I think there's just a misinterpretation of what's been written in the report there.
Okay, if we'll clarify that with Councillor Kay, because let's say actually the report on health and safety is a pretty positive one. Actually, overall, was certainly my reading. The number of positive good practices identified again was really good to see. So, okay, thank you. Any other questions on the Councillor Balding?
Yeah, you mentioned a while ago about a software glitch or something that wasn't configured. Was that some configuration level of 20 million?
Yeah.
It was going to be mentioned in this. Just wanted to get to the a bit more understanding. You know, was the software supplier, didn't they not have that in the software, or is it something that wasn't configured? So, and if the supplier didn't have it in, I assume they put it in free of charge, and you know, they've been sort of dealt with on that.
So the audit report on, when I said I didn't mean today, I meant the next committee. So there's an audit report on the key financial systems. The report due back on the Treasury Management Key Financial Systems audit is coming to the January committee, not to this one. But you're right, it was configuration. So actually they just haven't switched it on for the one element around local authority borrowing. So it was in there, it just hadn't been turned on.
Okay. So,
Okay, and we should see that in the report that comes to the next meeting. So,
thank you.
our new head of audits, information governance, just so committee members are aware, I was involved with the process by which we identified and selected the new head of audit and information governance, alongside the chairs of overview and scrutiny, actually. So thank you for inviting us to be involved with that. When does said person join us, and will he be able to attend one of these meetings?
I'm sure he would. He's already kind of been in quite a lot of contact with us. We are just waiting on the second reference for him, and then it is all systems go. The same with the two seniors and the auditor as well. So it's absolutely all plowing ahead as expected. So we've got a meeting in January. I mean, if you would like to meet him and we have ticked all the boxes, I'm sure he would be happy to attend.
That would be great. Joining from Staffordshire
County Council, yeah.
Is that enough? Eight members of the team, are they enough? Just thinking of it, yeah.
Look at the finance hat on. I think
I know it's overhead.
the thinking was that we would get this team in place and then assess where we are, I think. And we have, as Lorraine has pointed out, we've got two new agency auditors starting today. We've got two already in place, plus Lorraine. So we've actually got 5 members of an audit team at the moment, which is perhaps the biggest audit team we've had in quite a long time, or ever, as Linda has just said. So, and we'll have some handover there as well. So I would hope to keep those in place whilst the new team are settling in, and keep those agency team kind of going through as well. And so there's a good bit of handover as well. So it doesn't stop when one starts. So we've got that consistency and that planning all the way through. So it's a really exciting time. And when you meet the new head of, he's phenomenal, and he's all the things we've talked about, the single settlement, the Devo deal, all of that. Actually building an audit team with that in mind is quite an exciting, very exciting opportunity, I think, which hopefully is no pressure on him at all.
I share the excitement.
Right. Yes.
But this is really important that we have a internal audit team that is obviously going to meet the needs of the organisation going forward. And as we've found more than one occasion in this meeting, it's going to have increased complexity. And it's really important we're getting the assurance we need from this one.
That's why I was asking.
Fundamental to.
That's why I asked the question about enough, because there's the new Devo team is coming home. There's a lot of complex issues though, because you'll be working in local mini government here rather than Whitehall. Yeah. That's true, actually. That's when money's going to come back that way. Sorry.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions on the internal audit report?
I just say thank you to Lorraine for keeping all these plates spinning. So it has been a really kind of quite a lot to keep going, and lots of agency workers coming in and out. And I think Lorraine and Bambi have really kind of held the ship steady. So I just want to put on record my thanks to Lorraine, if that's okay, Chair.
Absolutely fine, and I completely echo your comments. So thank you. Right. Financial due diligence checks on suppliers, item 9 on the agenda. This was to some extent a follow-up to the discussion we had at the last meeting. So just
Yes, so we asked for a follow-up just in terms of giving you some more detail and transparency around the financial due diligence process that was undertaken in relation to the supplier who went into liquidation on the rail package, and we novated the contract against across to Kia. So I'll take the report as read. I'm just happy to take any questions on it, Mark. Have you got some? But yeah, we can go through.
Councillor Martin seemed to have one as well.
No, the Buckingham Group, who had originally been vetted and awarded the contract, excuse me, to complete the William Norman Darlaston train station, went into administration in September. But we bought it's been transferred to Kia, I think.
Yep.
Have agreed to honour the contract now in place with some small amendments. And this is just to confirm the due diligence undertaken and that they're of low risk of a similar issue occurring. So it's good to see.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had 2 or 3 little questions. I suppose my one question was, or observation was, the fact that we'd awarded a contract in June 21 based off accounts to December 19, and obviously COVID had happened and a huge amount had happened in the world of construction. And I think it's flagged in here that, fragility of the construction sector. Are we comfortable that we're doing diligence that is sufficiently up to date such that we're identifying the risks? And then secondly, we're then managing the risks when the contract is ongoing. And again, there's a reference in 3.9, I think, to how we pay in arrears, and therefore, I don't know if there's anything you can share about the position that we were in at the point it went into administration. And then there was a final question around, there's a refreshing of due diligence processes. I just wondered what those were.
So we always undertake the due diligence just before the award, but it's always on the latest set of accounts. So obviously we will have, accounts are always notoriously behind. So we would have done it on the latest set of accounts that are published on Companies House. It was worth noting that we, as we said in the previous report, and I've said in here, it was the sports and leisure arm that was in financial difficulty, not the rail division. So it was sports and leisure that went into administration of the lockdown, not the rail division, which is why the rail division was very quickly sold across and acquired by Kia, because it was actually financially robust and sustainable. It's always very difficult to do that when companies provide group accounts, if you like, and you're trying to do due diligence on group accounts. The last time we did due diligence on Buckingham was actually September 21, and it was on the 2020 accounts, and they passed all of our tests. So it's always quite difficult. While the construction market is notoriously volatile, it's very difficult to predict in terms of something that might go into administration. The reassurance for me is that all of our contracts, and the majority of our goods and services, but certainly contracts like this, are all paid in arrears. So we're not putting any cash out for us, etc., etc. We're only ever paying for work that they have actually done for the date that they've done it. So that's the
situation.
Yes.
Yes.
And it was the situation on this. We had paid an amount to it's a public forum. I don't particularly want to quote the amount, but actually we had paid an amount for the work that had been done to the date that they did it to, and we will not be paying any more. And yes, the contract has now been novated across to Kia. I think those factors plus our response being as swift as it was, I think were actually adequate in the circumstances we're in. We did, and it wasn't as a result of this actually, that I'd already asked the team to review the financial evaluation process that is undertaken through procurement, because the regs have recently changed, and I wanted to make sure that we were compliant. So they were already in the middle of doing a review of the financial evaluation process. And yes, there have been some tightening of the financial due diligence that happens. I can send the key process steps round to the committee in terms of what actually happens and what's changed. Just for a quick summary, it's slightly some of the recommendations. It's slightly changing the timeliness of when we do those checks. So instead of undertaking them just prior to contract award, what we're also doing is undertaking the financial assessments as part of the qualification for tender stage. So that will enable us to sort of rule people in or out at an earlier stage. And only qualify those meeting or exceeding the thresholds would then go into the tender actual process. Disclosures have also been tightened around the information that they need to submit and the upfront and transparent disclosure on that. So it limits the opportunity for the supplier to make a successful procurement challenge diminished in that way, because of being a little bit clearer and tighter on that. And then there's a further requirement to submit audited accounts for evaluation, and we normally look for that sort of within the last 3 years, and we've tightened that now to the last 2 years worth of accounts in line with the PPN notice. Another element that we've changed is the contract value related to turnover. So what we will do is, as part of financial due diligence, we'll do capacity, liquidity, going concern and gearing checks on the suppliers. And in terms of the contract value related to turnover, each as your capacity check, that's been amended now to be a requirement that it cannot be more than twice the contract value. In our previous one, it was 4 times. Okay. It was 4 times. It's now limited to twice. I can send this round. So.
Thank you. This may be a commercially sensitive, in terms of the implications of transferring to Kia Group in terms of time or cost. Is there anything that we should be aware of, or you could?
So there has been a movement on the programme for bringing the station into operation since the full business case was issued. Timescales have been impacted not just by this, but also around additional mines identification, and also some issues around acquiring land, which we are now going through a CPO process. So land remediation and land purchase have been a couple of issues on the scheme itself. But yes, so prior to going into administration, even those were pushing the opening date back to around autumn 25. And actually with the new programme with Kia Group now, looks as though it might slip slightly into early 26, but the team are actively working at the minute to try and bring that forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from other members of the committee on that? This is the economic circumstances. There is a lot of evidence out there at the moment about the strain that construction companies are under, and it can be very costly when it goes wrong. I did read the comment in 4.1. Noted it. I think in terms of the language used around construction companies.
Notoriously.
I don't think I'll comment whether I agree or not. I'll just note it. That's okay. Right. Any other questions on that matter? No. If not, we'll your report for the quarter.
Good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm presenting the programme assurance performance report today. As detailed in section 1 gives the remit of the report, and the report is here to note today. The reporting period covers July to September, so over the summer this year. And just for the benefit of any new members today, the report summarises the single assurance framework. In essence, is the combined authorities end-to-end programme management lifecycle. It brings together all the various different controls from governance, finance, assurance, legal and procurement. And I'm specifically presenting today the assurance element. So these are the projects which are developed through devolved investment funding to deliver major projects. Section 4 provides the detail of the key themes and summary of the report. Very briefly, the report does summarise that there continues to be a positive trend in terms of number of business cases being developed under a single assurance framework. Where that helps in the context of this committee is it helps to reduce the risk as projects then progress into delivery. There are lower numbers of business cases and appraisals undertaken in the last reporting period. But this it noted in terms of it being the summer period and the fact that the major transport project trust programme was being reprofiled, it does still show an increase on the same reporting period from last year.
Very good, thank you. I say this is a really important part of the assurance that we get as a committee around the combined authority. I only had one question, if I may. The tables in 3.3 do reference a slight deterioration on the business case maturity for management. And then if I go to the table in 3.4 on page 6, there's project 1, project 4, project 8. They've all got pretty low scores on maturity on management. Is there anything that we should be concerned about or know in relation to that?
No, because it's a comparison on the quarter. It's hard, so it depends on the number of business cases that come into that quarter, which you can't necessarily. There could be maturer business cases in another quarter, so it's hard to produce the trend. But there was nothing that was alarming in this period. What that does demonstrate in terms of management case, again, is the project readiness for delivery, so all of the different controls, the project plans, etc. And these are assessments which are undertaken on the draft business case, and so the maturity rating would improve by the time that the project is seeking approval through the governance process.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Martin.
Just I'm pleased to see that the investigation on the whistle blowing has been dismissed.
Oh, I think that's the next, the final bit of the
Is that
agenda.
the final
Yes,
bit?
yes.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think Kate had a comment on that one. No. Any other questions for Josie on the report? I say I find it very helpful and the comparisons, and I understand the trends. But section 4 is always the one I go to do straight away in terms of the sort of key themes. So thank you for that. Okay, nearly there. In terms of forward plan, any comments, questions from anybody around the forward plan? I'd say the only thing I think this committee would really welcome the presentation you gave on to ONS around the budget. I think whether that would be January or March, I'd sort of leave it to you, but I do think it's a really useful context for this committee to understand the budget position that we're in, both revenue and capital. That was all I had on the forward plan. If nothing else, just to note at this point, we passed the resolution that in accordance with section 100A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, as they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular party. So everybody happy with that resolution?
Yep.
Thank you very much. If we can exclude the press, just brings us to the final item